Welcome to episode number 20. I have a special guest today, Kavita Melwani, and we are going to show you how to get off the stress train. Stay tuned. So the big question is, how do ambitious people like us, who grew up listening to the old advice of go to school, work hard for 40 years, and retire when you're old, create a life today that is meaningful, abundant, healthy, and brings joy, while also leading a life that is productive and full of achievement? That is the question, and this is the podcast that will help give you the answers that you're searching for. My name is Del Denny, and welcome to the Upgrade Your Life podcast. Kavita Melwani is an empowerment coach, a highly sensitive woman, and an empath. She's a mother to two beautiful boys. Kavita is a serial entrepreneur who has owned and operated various businesses since 2003. The turning point in her life came when she started to work with a life coach to recognize her true gifts and callings. Kavita holds various coaching certifications, is a hypnotherapist, Reiki Master, and a certified money, market, and soul coach, and recently completed her Nutritional Therapy Practitioner program. She is on a mission to guide other heart-centered HSPs and empaths find their voice, accept and love themselves, and thrive. Kavita, welcome to the Upgrade Your Life podcast.
Thank you.
I am so excited to have you on here. We have an interesting topic today. We're going to talk about how do we overcome overwhelm? How do we get off that stress train? And before we even get to that point, Kavita, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, thank you for that introduction and for having me on your podcast today. So a little bit about myself. As you said, I'm an empowerment coach and I work with HSPs and empaths. And I say heart-centered people because a lot of people do not know they're an HSP or a highly sensitive person or an empath. So my clients come to me, they find me online mainly, and they are drawn to me. And usually the first thing we talk about is them figuring out that they're highly sensitive or they're an empath. So that I love when people are able to figure that out, because once you know more about who you are, then you can live accordingly. I started working with people as a coach about 5 years ago, maybe a little bit more. I'm losing track now. And that started after I worked with a coach because I was feeling lost, tired, stressed, and just not feeling satisfied with my life. So, and as I run my business, I have two boys, and one is a teenager, and one is going to be a teenager next month. So I have my hands full, and I have a lot of things to manage and potential sources of stress.
I think we're all right there with you with family and business and all that good stuff. I think we all can relate to that. We're going to be talking about, you had two, I guess to say, terms and definitions that we might be using on our show today: HSPs, highly sensitive people, and empaths. Can you kind of explain what an empath is or the difference between those two, just to educate us all?
Sure, I'd love to do that. So highly sensitive people is a term that Dr. Elaine Aron, a psychologist, figured out is a temperament that's found in 15 to 20% of the population. And she found it cross species. So the way I like to explain that is it's like someone turned up the volume on your nervous system. So the sounds, the feelings, all the senses are heightened. And an empath is most likely a highly sensitive person, and their sensitivity is mainly on the feelings aspect and the energetic aspect. So they have, like the word empathy is a good way to understand what an empath would be. And that's where that word comes from, where empath comes from. So you can really almost feel a person's energy. If you walk into a room, you can feel the room's energy. And sometimes you can absorb that. And so like anything, HSP and empath is I believe everything's on a spectrum. So there's levels of empaths, and there's actually different types of empaths. There's empaths that are really great at feeling. There are empaths that actually can have visions, and then we can go into empaths that have a really deep sensitivities that can, as we think of psychic energy and all and those types of things.
All right, perfect. And as I've started to really discover this through this topic of impasse and being a sensitive person, I started to realize some traits in myself, in my children. And so, like you said, it's a self discovery aspect. And one thing that is easy to happen is we get stressed out because we feel those feelings of other people. And so, we're going to talk about stress today, how to overcome that. And so, what tips do you have? What are some areas that we can do to get off that stress train?
Yeah, so stress, that's perfect what you just said. We're all experiencing stress. And as an HSP or an empath, there tends to be a higher level of stress that you experience, not because there's more things around you, it's your personal experience. And that's really where stress comes from. So there's different types of stress. There's the physical stress, let's say from a workout, right? If you run, that's physical exertion on your body. The type of stress that I'm talking about is that happens from the emotions, which the emotions start from thoughts. So when we have thoughts about what is going on, that is what causes the stress. Usually, for instance, the example that I like to give is if you're running late, right? If you're running late for a meeting or an appointment and you're, let's say, driving there, and while you're driving there, you're thinking about, oh, I'm running late. The person's gonna, think that I don't care, and all those swirling thoughts that can happen on your way to running late. That's what's causing the stress. Because if you really think about it, the situation of being late and it's the meaning that you give behind it. The actual situation is not causing the stress. It's your meaning that you're giving to it, the thoughts that you're putting behind it, which cause the emotion.
I find myself in that category quite a bit because it's just the mind just kind of plays tricks on you. You overthink it and you're overwhelmed. So do you have any steps to overcome these things? What can I do if I'm in that situation to get rid of that stress?
Yeah, so the first step that is about recognizing you and how you're wired and your patterns. So, for instance, I'll go back to that example of running late. Okay, so if you're a person that is not a morning person, then as much as you can, don't schedule things like that in the morning, right? That's not always possible. The more you can honor your own pattern and your own way of energy levels, and the fact that, okay, if you're a person that tends to run late, then what can you do to change that? Is it that your pattern is that you wait till 5 minutes before the time you were supposed to leave and then you start getting ready to leave, right? And that's causing you to be late and that's causing the stress? Then let's start looking at the patterns you have in your life. Let's start with when you have the most energy levels. And these energy levels are on a daily basis, and it can also be seasonal. For some people, they're great morning people, and they love waking up early, except when the time changes. Then they
Right.
don't like to wake up early, right? So then you switch according to that. So knowing that, recognizing the patterns that you have in your life is the first step.
Okay, so we recognize these patterns. We acknowledge what those patterns are. Are we a morning person? Are we a night person? What is our energy level? Where do we go from there?
So once you recognize the patterns, uh, then it's about making the small shifts that you would like to make. It's so that you have those less of those scenarios that cause the thoughts, that cause the emotions, that cause the stress. And then the next step that I talk about is downtime. So it's almost a badge of honor, right? So to say, I'm so busy. If you say, how are you? If you ask most people, how are you? Most likely they're going to say something like, oh, I've been so busy,
Hmm.
right? And so that's like, if you don't say you're busy, it's almost like you're not doing anything. You don't fit into society today. So we don't talk about downtime. And a lot of people that I've worked with don't even know what they like to do for downtime, which
Hmm.
is really an interesting thing, right? Because we have all this technology that was supposed to help us be more productive, and make life easier so that we could have more downtime. So instead, we're just doing stuff all day, right? And we're just getting our things done. And then we may find ourselves down the YouTube rabbit hole or the social media rabbit hole where we start scrolling. Okay. So, what I talk about is that that is actually you choosing subconsciously downtime.
Mm.
Because if you choose it or not, your brain is going to figure out a way for you to do something other than work. So instead, acknowledge that this is happening, recognize, oh, yes, I usually do that around 3 o'clock every day. Around 3 o'clock every day is when I start to want to see some videos on YouTube, and I want to do this. I want to go, and I start finding myself scrolling on one of the social media sites, and I can't really find myself stopping. Instead, choose what is actually going to recharge you. What is actually going to be downtime that feeds your soul instead of something that you're just subconsciously choosing because it's right there. So really picking those things during the day. So maybe at 3 o'clock, what you do, and you recognize that that's a pattern that's going on. And at 3 o'clock, you consciously say, being outside in nature for 10 minutes is going to recharge me. And that can be some downtime for me. And then I can come back and finish the other things that I need to do.
I like that. I think we got to give ourselves permission to have that downtime because, like you said, we with all the technology that we have and our busy schedules that we have, we wear it as a badge of honor. But at the same time, though, we have to give ourselves permission to have that downtime because I think about it like this: if we're constantly working out, if we work 7 days a week, we work out and we push it hard. Well, if we do that day in day out, we're going to break. We have to have a day of rest. We have to have that relaxation to keep our minds fresh. And I think a lot of people miss that.
Yes, yes, that's so true. And actually, part of the reason that I like talking about stress, or I'm called to talk about stress, is because I have experienced the negative effects of stress in my own life. I have an autoimmune condition from stress that really stem from stress. I have had other health issues. And so I really would love to inspire others and to help as many people as I can get off the stress train so they don't have the effects of stress on their body. Because eventually everybody does feel some physical, some emotional impact from not being able to get off that stress train, get off the constant cycle of working 7 days a week or pushing themselves beyond their bodies without resting, without recuperating.
Absolutely. And I think that's where in personal development, I think we need to talk more about our mental health. We need to be better at sharpening the mind, giving ourselves to say, hey, it's okay to take that 10-minute break. It's okay to walk out in nature. It's okay to feel the sunshine. That's what we really want to do. We want those things, but we feel guilty for, hey, I gotta hit that email. I've gotta call that one person, and we neglect ourselves and our own mental health, our own sanity for the day.
Yeah, it's so true. And especially as business owner, there's always something that can be done.
Always. All right. So we got a couple steps there. We recognize our patterns. We give ourselves some downtime. What else can we do to get off that stress train?
So the other thing that I love to talk about, because this really impacts our behavior, is knowing our self-worth story. So we define our worth based on accomplishments, based on maybe how much money we make, based on if you're in certain types of businesses, maybe how many followers you have. And so when we start to define our worth on those external circumstances, then we can push ourselves beyond and then continue not taking breaks, not recuperating, not taking care of ourselves, and then even our relationships can get neglected, right? If we
Hmm.
go beyond just our own personal selves, because our worth is tied to all these external things. So knowing What is your self-worth story? Often these things start for most people when we're children. According to my training as a hypnotherapist, our subconscious mind has been programmed by the time we're around 8 years old.
Hmm.
So maybe even start to think back to your childhood and how worth was defined in your home, in your family of origin. And so I know in my family of origin, it was often on the money, right? How much money does a person make? And that person's income level was directly tied to what their worth was.
So I have used, and I see that time and time again. I had a friend come to me the other day. He's a school teacher, and he asked me, Del, hey, I love what I do, but I'm not making much money, and I feel kind of low. What advice do you have for me? And I gave him a little bit of advice, but I'm kind of curious. What would you might say to him?
So, what I would say to him is, first of all, to go back to his why of why he chose to be a teacher, because most likely a person chose to be whatever they're doing for some reason. Something drove them that way. And so, if he can go back to that why, that's one step of inspiring. And the other thing that I would tell him is to look at the impact that he's making on a daily basis. So people come to me a lot of times, they come to a coach and they want, "Well, what's my purpose?" Right? That's a big question I get a lot. What's my purpose? I want to find out my purpose. And that's why they want to work with me.
Mm,
And actually, that's part of the reason that I chose to work with a coach when I work, which I continue to work with coaches because I want to continue to evolve. Let's say my first coach, right?
hmm
And so what I love to tell people is that we all have multiple, and I may not use the right grammar, but purposes
hmm
in our
Okay.
life,
All right.
right? And so every day we are fulfilling our purpose just by living and being who we are in the world, right? For you, you've created this podcast and you're creating an impact. That's your role. That's part of your role. And that's not your only role,
True.
right? That's not your only purpose.
Okay.
Yeah,
Well,
so really going back to that, what impact do you make every day? Just waking up in the morning and smiling at someone.
how could someone make the shift to with the society that we're in, where everything is attached to money, to be able to shift that away from money?
To shift the worth away from money?
Hmm
Okay. Yeah, so that's a great question. There's, I would say, what I say to, I've worked with people on this, and it's not a quick fix. It's not an easy fix. It's actually an everyday thing, right? So you talk about the value of mental health, right? Mental health is important, just as important, and is actually tied to our physical health as well. And so just like we have to eat every day, hopefully you do some type of movement every day. We have to drink water. Working on that mindset and our mental health every day is really important. When you're wanting to shift that worth, that self-worth story away from the external, like the money,
hmm
and shifting to more of maybe just fulfilling your purpose or just the fact that you're a person and you're here, then that's going to take a daily practice. It's not going to happen with just one thing, right? So you
hmm
can start with maybe, we've all heard of gratitude practices, right? Most people have, where you sit down at the beginning or the end of the day and you write about 3 things that you're grateful for. So instead, what about a gratitude practice for you, for yourself? How you're grateful for who you are in the world. So, what are 3 things or 5 things that are great about you? And you actually write them down every day. Right. So that's one quick, easy thing that the listeners can take away and try so to start that shift.
I love that, because I always go back to that as well, because when you have gratitude in your heart, it's hard to feel other things outside of that. Gratitude brings that warmth, it brings love, it brings joy, it brings peace. And in the world that it's easy to feel self-conscious and that I'm not worth anything, gratitude, it always kickstarts that fire to get that mindset back where it needs to be. When people are working with you, what are some of the biggest challenges that people have coming to you that you help them overcome?
So one of the challenges, the biggest challenges, is stress. Right. The second one would be finding their purpose in life. And there's been studies. I don't remember the researcher, but the research that's been done on happiness shows that purpose is one of the greatest indicators of happiness. So if we can connect with our purpose, then our level of happiness automatically goes up. Okay, so people come to me with that. They come feeling like the world, they just don't fit in. They're
Mm,
anxious, and they sense like that they're always trying to fit in, and they just can't work the way the others work. And that's where the figuring out who you are and your patterns. Those are the reasons people come to me. They're really dissatisfied somehow with their life. Usually their careers, uh,
uh-huh.
or relationships are the two main things.
What gets you excited about being a coach? I know what drives me, and I won't share it just because I don't want to pre-frame what you might say. But what excites you about being a coach and as you're working with people?
I love seeing the changes that people make, that they've been wanting to make. I love in a session when they I can see the light going off, and since I'm an empath, I can feel the energy shift in that person. And so recently I saw, talking about social media, one of my past clients, she worked with me a couple years ago, and she just got promoted again, and she's so excited in her new position. So things like that inspire me.
Mm, that's awesome. Is there anything else that we should know about how to overcome stress? Any other key takeaways that you might have for us?
Yeah, so when I do want to talk a little bit about the energy aspect.
Okay.
And so one of the key aspects is that you first know, like we talked about, recognize your patterns, and then you choose your downtime consciously, and then the self-worth story. And so the self-worth story, we talked one step about writing the gratitude, right? Writing the gratitude about you every
Hmm.
day. What are something that you do? And so that's that. That's just a starting point. Understanding your self-worth story from when you are a child and where it comes from, that's something that I think would be really valuable. So actually sitting down, because when you write with a pen or pencil, it activates different parts of your brain than typing. So if you can sit down and you can write, when I grew up, when I was a child, this is how self-worth was defined. And then actually sitting down and writing how you want your worth to be now. How do you want to define your worth? Right? And so connecting with that aspect and the energy behind it, and even reading that maybe once a week, maybe every day if it's really something that's activated with you in your life right now. That's just another tip. I just would love for the listeners to go, just leave with a few tips on that they can actually go out and implement.
That's great.
And
I love that. I got a question for you. I ask all of our guests this question, and it's kind of an introspection question, and it goes like this: if you could turn back time and talk to your 18-year-old self, what advice would you give yourself for reaching your full potential?
I would tell my 18 to really trust yourself, to stop looking outside for the answers, right? So really learn. That's part of what I teach my clients, is to trust themselves, to trust their own intuitive guidance, because most of my clients are getting advice from 10 different people, and they get 10, sometimes 10 different suggestions. So that creates more confusion, and then they've lost touch with what they really want, and they're confused. So I would say trust your gut, trust your intuition. It's usually right.
Amen to that. Absolutely. Kavita, where can we learn more about you at? How can we get in touch with you?
Yeah, so thanks for asking. My business is called The Enlightened Heart. And so I have a free download. It's a mini ebook called The 5 Keys to Overcoming Overwhelm for Highly Sensitive People and Empaths. So I would love for anyone that's interested to receive that. You can go to my website, theenlightenedheart.pro, and there'll be a little box where you can put your name and email address, and that you will receive that.
Beautiful. Well, I'll make sure I'll add that to the show notes. That way people can link right over to it. Well, Kavita, thank you so much for coming on the Upgrade Your Life podcast. I learned a lot here. I'm ready to get off the stress train. So thank you for sharing all this wealth of knowledge with us.
Yeah, thank you for having me here. It was a lot of fun.
Thank you very much. Well, that's it, my friends. Thanks so much for being with us this week. Do you have some feedback that you'd like to share? Well, please leave a note in the comments section below. If you've enjoyed this episode, make sure you share it with your friends, and don't forget to subscribe to the show on iTunes to get automatic episode updates of the Upgrade Your Life podcast. And finally, please take a minute to leave us an honest review and ratings on iTunes. They really help us out when it comes to the ranking of the show, and I make it a personal point to read every single one of those reviews that we get. So please leave a review. I appreciate it, and thanks for listening.